we're talking about how reforms don't work if they come from the top down, either by just applying universal theory or by copying something already made, which is the usual way in which intellectuals and social scientists want to do things, because it gives them a quick answer, and they can call that answer scientific. But it doesn't work. And this is very much to the heart of the way Tolstoy thinks. Where other people find things that are relatively simple, he knows that the way to find things in the psyche of the social world or in ethics simple is to simplify them so you don't see what's really going on. Just not to see. But he, above all, sees what other people miss. You know, when he's talking about a character's consciousness, you know, where somebody else will show, well, it moves from this thought or feeling to this one, he will see 5 or 6 steps in between, any one of which could have gone in a different direction. And it has a whole different character. Where other people see, well, it had to be this way, he sees all the contingencies that showed it could have been different. They think it's neat, he finds all the mess they haven't seen because they just know that things are simple and therefore just see simple things. They find the evidence that fits their worldview. Tolstoy is always looking and seeing things are more complicated. That pertains as well to how he writes, where even the best novelists will sometimes turn to formulas, allegories, simple symbols, like the ones they taught you in high school. Tolstoy will not. He has complete contempt for writing in that way because he's a supreme realist. The world doesn't have simple symbols. It doesn't have basic allegories. It's always more complex than those models let you know. Well, we're going to see several, you don't hear me? Yeah. We're going to see several examples of that coming up. One of them, a simple one, takes place, relatively simple, when Steva comes to the countryside to visit Levin. And they go out hunting, and Levin is on edge, concerned because he's thinking of Kitty and wants to find out from Steva what's happening with Kitty, and has her very much in mind. And it's also the case that he's really enjoying the hunting, and the weather is wonderful, and Tolstoy tells us how much he enjoys the fine day. Now you understand no other writer would do that, because if you are obsessed with your love, who you have lost, you are thinking of nothing else. If you're thinking of something else, that would be a sign you don't really love her, right? Isn't that how, I mean, in movies they would do it that way, and you might even think yourself, oh, well, listen, if he can eat dinner, he can't be that upset. It's just, but think for a moment. Is it really the case that when you are upset or depressed or thinking deeply of somebody you love, that you can't enjoy good weather? That's a literary trope. It's not real. And so Tolstoy makes sure to tell you that it's not insincere. He really is concerned with Kitty, and he's enjoying the fine. It's this sort of thing, that breaking the pattern that you might expect from reading a lot of literature or a lot of criticism. That is part of the way he creates that impression that it really is like reality. It's not artified, so to speak, made artificial by little tricks. The next scenes I'm going to come back to. He has an argument there with Steve over selling the forest, and with this merchant named Reavinin. I'm going to come back to that later. There's some important things there. But now I want to just race ahead to the races, also in part 2. Now, there's a lot to say about these races, but one thing, and we're going to pause on several passages, but one thing that you are not to think is what all the English teachers would tell you to think. And that is, it's an allegory. You see? Did you detect the allegory? Did you feel really clever doing it? You see, Vronsky rides Frou-Frou, the beautiful mare, and breaks her back, and so it is with Anna. It's a perfect allegory. If Tolstoy worked that way, he wouldn't be Tolstoy. He'd be a third-rate writer showing how clever he is. And if you think about it for a while, it's perfectly clear that that is not the case. It's like Tolstoy is inviting you by a few similarities to think, an allegory, and then but you think a little further and you realize all the places it's not. I'll just give you one now because I don't want to give away too much of the plot. But that allegory would presume that Vronsky has the power and is in charge of that relationship. But even a superficial reading would tell you that Anna wraps Vronsky around her little finger just the way she can control Karenina. It's definitely not true. He's always at a loss. He can't get her to talk about what he wants to talk about any more than Karenina can, right? You know, when she gets into bad moods later in the book, he doesn't understand her, doesn't know what to do, and whatever he does, she gets around him. He can't even understand her. She is the one, clearly, with greater substance. I mean, she's much more of a human being, if you want. Whatever it is that makes a human being, she's got more of it. And she's a lot smarter than he is about relations. She's clearly the one in charge. Whereas that allegory, treating the horse scene as an allegory, would presume the opposite. This is, why. This is also very characteristic of Tolstoy. You think you found an allegory, but if you really think about it, you haven't. And the same is true with symbols in Tolstoy. The only time he ever uses a symbol is if it is the sort of thing that would actually occur in real life, that wouldn't violate realism. Look, sometimes in real life, you do see things that come off as symbolic. Like Levin will, he's looking up at the sky, and he sees the pattern of the clouds, and the pattern changes, and he thinks, yes, and so my views of life are changing. He's taking it as a symbol. That happens. People do things that feel symbolic because the symbol really does fit how they're feeling. They act that way. Only if it's the sort of thing that would happen in real life will those symbols be used. If it's the sort of thing you say, how clever the writer is, Tolstoy would be allergic to doing it. The scenes of the races are really interesting. And one thing, it's really two scenes. It begins with, we trace Anna before the races with Karenina and then Vronsky. And then we go following Vronsky through the races. And then we go back and tell it again, not from the perspective of the race, the horse race, but from the audience, the viewership of the horse race, who's in the stands. First we get what happens on the racetrack, then we go all the way back and tell the same story again from another point of view. Why do it that way? Well, we're going to see why do it that way. Because it's not the only, you could have just mixed it, right? And then this thing happened in the race here, and then this thing, they reacted this way in the stands, and then Anna did this, and meanwhile Vronsky did over here, and the horse did. You could do it that way. I think most writers would do it that way. But it's not the way Tolstoy wants to do it. We're going to see why. We turn to page 215. This is just before, in the lead up to the races. She's with Vronsky. He thinks this is a very difficult position they're in. They need to do something about it. And she doesn't want to think about that. And therefore, he can't get her to pay attention to that. She will always change the subject or turn it to something she doesn't want to pay attention to. So he's saying, there's a way out of every situation. We must make a decision, he said. Anything's better than the situation in which you're living. Of course, I see how you torture yourself over everything in the world, your son and your husband. Oh, not over my husband, she said with a quiet smile. I don't know him. I don't think of him. He doesn't exist. You're not speaking sincerely, I know you. You worry about him too. When it comes to the point where Vronsky has to tell her that she's being hard on her husband, she's gone really far, right? Oh, he doesn't even know, she said. And suddenly a hot flush came over her face, her cheeks, her brow, her neck crimsoned, and tears of shame came to her eyes. But we won't talk of him. That is, she is still ashamed of what she's doing. Particularly ashamed of saying, he doesn't know, he doesn't care. Go a little further, though. What's to be done according to you? Well, let's actually beginning of the chapter. Vronsky had several times already, though not so resolutely as now, tried to get her to consider their situation, and every time he had been confronted by the same superficiality and triviality with which she met his appeal. Now, the false listening that we talked about. It was as though there was something in this which she could not or would not face, as though as soon as she began to speak of this, she, the real Anna, retreated somehow into herself, and another strange and unaccountable woman came out, whom he did not love and whom he feared, and who was in opposition to him. But today, he really wanted to have it out. What's to be done according to you, she asked, with the same frivolous irony. You understand that she's pregnant. Tell everything and leave him. Yeah, and that's what would happen in a soap opera. Very easy. Tell your husband that you can't live with him and leave him. Very simple. Just go and do it. Very well, let's suppose I do that, she said. Do you know what the result of that will be? I can tell you beforehand. And a wicked light gleamed in the eyes that had been so soft a minute before. And now this is when she's really okay? Yeah, you love another man and have entered into a criminal liaison with him? Mimicking her husband, she threw an emphasis over the word criminal, as Alexei Alexandrovich did. I warned you of the consequences, and so on, so she keeps mimicking him, right? And then she said at the top of page 217, that's what will happen. He's not a man, but a machine, and a spiteful machine when he's angry, she added. Well, not a man, but a machine. This is the idea that he cannot feel, right? I can't be hurting him. He doesn't know. He doesn't exist. He doesn't care. He's a machine. But of course, he can feel. We're going to see lots of, we already saw that. We're going to see lots of other examples of it. This is her way of coping with her shame and her guilt. Now you understand that Stiva wouldn't have to dehumanize somebody like that because he has no conscience at all. He doesn't have to satisfy his conscience because he doesn't have one. Right? But she does. And then, remember, she also says he's a spiteful machine. Now you understand the whole point of being a machine is that you are not human. You don't have human emotions. So a spiteful machine is a contradiction, right? It just shows, you know, how she's not really believing what she's saying, right? If he were a machine, he couldn't feel anything. Well, turn to page now 229. We're getting the state of mind of Karenina here. This is in chapter 26, about halfway down the paragraph. From the day of their conversation after the party at Princess Tverskaya, the one that we talked about, he had never spoken again to Anna of his suspicions and his jealousies. And that habitual tone of his of bantering mimicry was the most convenient tone possible for his present attitude towards his wife. He was a little colder to her. He simply seemed to be slightly displeased with her for that first midnight conversation, which he repelled. In his attitude toward her, there was a shade of vexation, but nothing more. You would not be frank with me, he seemed to say, mentally addressing her. So much the worse for you. Now you may beg as you please, but I won't be frank with you. So much the worse for you, he said mentally, which is what a lot of us would do, right? He said mentally, like a man who, after vainly attempting to extinguish a fire, should fly into a rage with his vain efforts and say, oh, very well then, you shall burn for this. It's, of course, ridiculous, right? That's a reaction that's ridiculous. This man, so subtle and astute in official life, did not realize all the senselessness of such an attitude towards his wife. He did not realize it because it was too terrible for him. He's obviously feeling, right? He reacts this way because he feels this way. It was too terrible to realize his actual position. And he shut down and locked and sealed up in his heart that secret place where his feelings towards his family, that is his wife and his son, lay hidden. He who had been such a concerned father had from the end of that winter become peculiarly cold to his son and adopted towards him just the same bantering tone he used with his wife. Aha, young man, was the greeting with which he met him. Now think of it this way. He who had been such a concerned father. This is another one of those statements like the one about she had noticed when he went to bed 5 minutes later than usual. It's a key piece of information put in the middle of a long paragraph about something else in a sentence where it is not even the main clause. But it's an important piece of information. He apparently had been a concerned father, just like they had had a close, if not especially romantic, marriage. It's another one of those saying, it's camouflaged again. You could miss it. But he's trying to teach you how to see things that you would normally miss. Well, let's go, turn to page 234. Now when he comes in, Karenina comes to see her. This is after Vronsky does, right? And I'm just going to do the beginning of this. There's a lot going on here. Anna was upstairs, standing in front of the mirror. This is one of the many passages where she's admiring herself in the mirror. She's fixing her dresses, all those things about, her incredible concern with her appearance. And with Anya's assistant pinning the last ribbon on her gown when she heard the carriage wheels crunching the gravel at the entrance. It's too early for Betsy, she thought. And glancing out of the window, she caught sight of the carriage and the black hat of Alexei Alexandrovich, and the ears she knew so well sticking up. This is one of the many passages where she's focusing on those ears, which she's taught herself to repel her. How unfortunate, can he be going to stay the night, she wondered? And the thought of what might come of such a possibility struck her as so awful and terrible, without dwelling on it for a moment, she went down to meet him with a bright and radiant face, and conscious of the presence of that spirit of falsehood and deceit in herself, which she had come to know of late, she abandoned herself to that spirit and began talking. This is, where she is now. She has to be in this spirit of falsehood, but yet she's going to blush for shame later on, right? And that's one of the reasons she is in the spirit of falsehood, because she knows she's doing what her conscience will not accept. Now, finally, we get to the racetrack. And now you're going to get to see all over again about what happens with the horses and Vronsky, but not from Vronsky's point of view, but from Anna's point of view, or anyone in the audience. And it's going to become clear why Tolstoy does this. But let's start with the beginning of the chapter 28 here on page 236. It's going to be from inside Anna's consciousness. One of those passages in the third person that are paraphrasing her thoughts, with an occasional comment from the author about those thoughts. When Alexei Alexandrovich reached the racetrack, Anna was already sitting in the pavilion beside Betsy, so that in that pavilion where all the higher society had gathered. She caught sight of her husband in the distance. Two men, her husband and her lover, were the two centers of her existence, and unaided by her external senses, she was aware of their nearness. She was aware of her husband as because of what she was experiencing, right? Approaching a long way off, and she could not help following him in the surging crowd in the midst of which he was moving. She watched his progress toward the pavilion, saw him now responding condescendingly to an ingratiating bow. Is it really an ingratiating bow? Is he responding condescendingly? Or is that how she sees his behavior? It's clear how she sees it. Right? This is how she's taught herself to see him. Now exchanging friendly, nonchalant greetings with his equals, now assiduously trying to catch the eye of some great one of this world. You're going to see this one thing that we will learn about Karenin is that this is just what he does not do. I mean, he is absolutely honest, does whatever he thinks is right, does not ingratiate himself. He thinks naively that all he has to do is do his job honestly and with integrity, and that's all that's required. In a system where you weren't appointed, where you had to run for office, he wouldn't make dog catcher, right? But he's not, this sort of person who Anna's describing. And then you get trying to catch the eye of some great one in this world and tipping his big round hat that squeezed the tips of his ears. If you had any doubt that this is her perspective, the ears should make it clear that that's what this has been, right? All these ways of his she knew, and all were hateful to her. This is what now she's saying to herself. I know all these ways of him, and I hate them all. Now, direct quote. Nothing but ambition, nothing but desire to get ahead. That's all there is in his soul, she thought. As for those lofty ideals, love of culture, religion, they are only so many tools for advancing. And skipping to the bottom of the page. I am a wicked woman, a lost woman, she thought, but I don't like lying. Does this remind you of somebody? Nothing could come of it but falsehood and lying, which were so contrary to his nature. This is Stiva. This is Stiva's sister. I mean, she's involved in an affair. She is concealing the whole life that she is leading, and he is the one who is false? She's the one who can't stand lying? I can't endure falsehood. Well, as for him, her husband, it's the breath of his life, falsehood. You know what? When people very adamantly accuse other people of something, sometimes, not always of course, But sometimes it's because either that's what they are doing, or they're planning to do it. Because something will seem completely, if you want to justify, violence or something else, or insulting somebody, the idea that they're doing it to you already, or are just about to, really helps. Now sometimes, of course, they are just about to, but one question to ask is, it may not be based on any evidence at all. It may be simply a justification of your doing the same thing by saying it's in response. Psychologists call this projection, right? Which is too simple a word for it. It's much more complex than that. But that's clearly what's happening here, right? He knows all about it. He sees it all. What does he care if he can talk so calmly? If he were to kill me, if he were to kill Vronsky, I might respect him. By the way, when he does get angry later, she says, it's completely unfair for you to get angry because I'm the victim here. He can't win no matter what he does, whether he's angry or tries to be calm. No, all he wants is falsehood and propriety, Anna said to herself. And now the author comes in. Not considering, you see, you know that it can't be from her perspective, because when the author tells you what she's not thinking, she can't be thinking what she's not thinking, right? Not considering exactly what it was she wanted of her husband and how she would like to see him behave. She did not understand either that his peculiar loquacity that day, so exasperating to her, was merely the expression of his inward distress and uneasiness. As a child that has been hurt skips about, putting all his muscles into movement to drown the pain, in the same way Alexei Alexandrovich needed mental exercises to drown the thoughts of his wife, which in her presence and in Vronsky's, and with the continual iteration of Vronsky's name, would force themselves in his attention. And it was natural for him to talk well and cleverly, as it is natural for a child to skip about. Put yourself in his position. Here he is, the hero of the day everyone is talking about is Vronsky. Probably, although he tries not to think of it, his wife's lover. She is there sitting with the other spirits, like Princess Betsy, who presumably know and must be mocking him. How would you feel? I don't know if it were me, I wouldn't go at all. Right? It's very difficult for him, right? And then, okay, he does begin to talk. Well, what's the topic? First you get, at the bottom of the page, people, one horseman jumps and hits the barrier instead of jumping over it, crashes his head against it, and is killed right away, right? The emperor, we're told later, is displeased by the number of injuries and deaths, happening here. And one lady says, at the bottom of page 218, oh, it's Princess Betsy. No, I shan't come another time. It's too exciting, says Princess Betsy. Isn't it, Anna? It is exciting, but one can't tear oneself away, said another lady. If I had been a Roman woman, I would never have missed a single circus. Now, you understand, corrupt viewing, the symbol of it, what she's referring to in all of European history is the people who attended Roman circuses. You know what happened at Roman circuses? You would watch gladiators fight other gladiators to the death. You would have Christians thrown to the lions to be torn apart, or other prisoners, right, to be torn apart. It was bloody and gruesome, and the audience loved it. They wanted more blood. Okay? That's what it means to say, I wish I had been a Roman woman watching a circus. Okay? It is an example of immoral looking. I mean, those things are happening because people love looking at them. What does it show that, you love looking at things like this? Remember, we heard earlier that there's such a thing as false listening. There's immoral listening. There's also such a thing as immoral looking, which is what's happening here. Now, we have a term for one type of immoral looking. We call it voyeurism. when you're looking at something you're not supposed to. You become a voyeur. This is not voyeurism, but it's another type of immoral looking. And then that's precisely what Karenin basically says. On the next page, there are two aspects, Alexei Alexandrovich resumed. Those who take part and those who look on. And love for such spectacles is unmistakably a proof of low degree of development in the spectator. It's immoral looking. Well, Anna is doing a lot of looking here. She keeps the binoculars focused on Vronsky. She's not even looking like everybody else. She has it focused just on Vronsky alone. And Karenin finds himself, he's trying not to, but he can't resist looking at her, looking at Vronsky. You got it? It's a drama of looking at an act of looking. This is how Tolstoy is trying to get you to see that the theme of looking is an action with moral value. Remember, it's Anna's uncharitable looking at Karenin that has got her to see him in a false way, as much worse than he is. That's one of the lessons he's trying to teach you, right? That looking and listening are actions that have moral value. You can't just say, well, I didn't do anything, I was only looking. That can have moral value. And so you're dramatizing looking as an action. First of all, because that's why you get first the race and then the looking at the race, because that is part of the point. Looking is an action like racing. And then you get that as the conversational topic. And then you get a drama of Karenin looking at how Anna is looking. And then remember, at one point, she feels his eyes upon her, and she turns briefly and looks at him looking at her looking. Got it? You get the third order, and then she looks at Anna, what the hell, I don't care, and she turns back and looks at him again. This is, needless to say, making it harder and harder for Karenin to tell himself, oh, it's just my suspicions. Nothing is really going on, which is what he's trying to tell himself, to protect himself from the horrible pain. The bottom of the page. But here's this lady, too, and two others, very much moved as well. It's very natural. He's telling us for her to look that way. It doesn't mean anything. Alexandrovich told himself, he tried not to look at her, but unconsciously his eyes were drawn to her. He examined that face again, trying not to read what was so plainly written on it. And against his will, with horror, he read on it what he did not want to know. This is not a person who doesn't care, right? Who can't feel. This is doing everything he can not to know what is perfectly, plainly obvious. Well, the next important moment you get is when he takes her home after the races. She's very upset by the accident Vronsky has had. She doesn't exactly know how it's turned out. On page 242, again he wants to talk, right? She took her seat in her husband's carriage in silence, and in silence drove out of the crowd of carriages. In spite of all he had seen, Alexander still did not allow himself to consider his wife's real condition. He merely saw the outward symptoms. He saw that she was behaving unbecomingly, and considered it his duty to tell her. But it was very difficult for him not to say more, to tell her nothing but that. He opened his mouth to tell her that she had behaved unbecomingly, but he could not help saying something utterly different. What an inclination we all have, though, for these cool spectacles. I observe. What? I don't understand, I said out of contemptuously. He was offended, and once began to say what he had meant to say. I'm obliged to tell you, he began, so now we are to have it out, she thought, and she felt frightened. I'm obliged to tell you that your behavior has been unbecoming today, he said to her in French. Why in French? So the coachman will understand. In what way has my behavior been unbecoming, she said aloud, turning her head swiftly and looking him straight in the face, not with a bright expression that seemed masking something, but with a look of determination under which she concealed with difficulty the dismay she was feeling. Careful, he said, pointing to the open window opposite the coachman. Don't can't be so dramatic here, they'll overhear us. And skipping to the next page, middle of the page down, she is smiling at my suspicions. Yes, she will tell me now what she told me before, that there is no foundation for my suspicions, that it's absurd. At that moment, when the revelation of everything was hanging over him, there was nothing he expected so much as that she would answer mockingly as before that his suspicions were absurd and utterly groundless. So terrible to him was that which he knew that now he was ready to believe anything. Again, this is clearly not a machine. But the expression of her face, scared and gloomy, did not now promise even deception. Possibly I was mistaken, said he. If so, I beg your pardon. He's really saying, don't tell me, don't tell me. No, you were not mistaken, she said deliberately, looking desperately into his cold face. You were not mistaken. I was, and I could not help being in despair. I hear you, but I am thinking of him. I love him, I am his mistress, I can't bear you, I'm afraid of you, and I hate you. You can do what you want with me. Isn't it good of her to let him down so easily? I mean, that's a really sensitive way of telling somebody something really, really difficult. She will, by the way, when she next sees Vronsky, use that cliched expression, I have told my husband everything. She uses these cliches because she's read too many novels when people actually speak that way, right? The way you might see it on television. But she hasn't told her husband everything. She's omitted one tiny little unimportant detail, that she's pregnant. Which what some people might think is significant. How does he react? Drive back into the corner of the carriage, she broke into sobs, hiding her face in his hands. That's crucial, but she breaks into sobs here. Alexei Alexandrovich did not stir and kept looking straight before him, but his whole face suddenly bore the solemn rigidity of the dead, and his expression did not change during the whole time of the drive home. On reaching the house, he turned his head, still with the same expression. Where does this solidity of the dead take place? It's not what you expect at this point. We're going to find out why he reacts that way. And it is going to be a key to the essence of him. She cries. He becomes as rigid as a corpse. Why? Just pose it as a question. Tolstoy doesn't answer it yet, but he will. Okay, the last thing we want to do in part 2 is at the end of part 2. The last sequence of chapters now concerns Kitty.